So I want to start off by just asking us to consider, what does hybrid teaching and learning mean to you? What do we think that actually is? So if you look at the pictures, I think what we know is that it's really about the kind of support and connection that we have with students. If a student is from afar, if they're on a Zoom or they're right next to me, that's a different kind of interaction. It's a different connection. And those students have different kinds of supports. The thing I want to suggest is that the essential shift in this concept of hybrid learning is actually internal. For us, it means that we are working without our normal routine or our normal habit. Our efforts at self-regulation, both adults and students, all of a sudden have changed. And by the way, if students are home alone, there could be a lack of effective self-regulation. I like to think about this as bowling without bumpers. All of a sudden the bumpers are gone and I am bowling down the lane, and who knows what's going to happen because my ecosystem has changed. The theory of self-regulation is really important to understand here as we consider this disruption in how we're doing our work and how we're doing our learning. Because self-regulation, as we've looked at it, social psychologists have looked at it, they ask, is this just something I know? Is it knowledge? Is it a skill that I learned to do? Or is it a strength? And the studies indicate that it actually is more like a strength, kind of like working out at the gym. So I have a certain level of strength, okay? It's self-regulation of keeping myself together, if you will. But the more chaos, the more stress, the more disruption, the more change that comes my way, I just get tired, right? I just kind of run out of steam. I run out of strength. So as we think about hybrid learning, whether that means I'm just online or I'm in my classroom, but I might be going home some days, or whatever your particular situation is. And we think about the teacher kind of self-regulation for ourselves, literally keeping it together for ourselves and our kids. It isn't that we can or we can't. It's that we can get tired. We can run out of steam. Self-regulation is really about the habits, the procedures, and routines that actually establish expectations for us and for our kids, guidelines that reassure us that we are on the right path. Hybrid learning environments not only disrupt kind of the established patterns that we know and love or become used to, but they can present multiple new patterns, even new chaotic ways of being, of interacting, whether I'm at home or in class. And because of that change, it takes more effort to self-regulate. I can literally run out of steam faster. Our goal today is to think about a set of norms that are effective across these different environments that help to support us in our self-regulation efforts so that we teach effectively, that we learn effectively. It's important to start then with an understanding of what is the problem of practice. Literally, what are the things that lead to me running out of steam, running out of strength when it comes to self-regulation? As educators, we know that learning is centered on a daily story in our classroom. Literally, we create a movie with our students every single day. We're all storytellers, but every single one of us has run into this situation where the story we're trying to tell, the movie we're trying to make on any given day is not always a hit maker. Sometimes it's not a hit with one student. Maybe that student has seemed disengaged for a bit, a few days, a few weeks, forever. Or it might just be the day where something isn't resonating. I'm not connecting. But I can tell you whether it's all the time, some of the time, or just in a moment, there has never been a more critical time for understanding why we aren't connecting in the moment. What is the unseen, invisible barrier between connecting with our students as we are creating that story, we're creating that narrative in the classroom? One of the really interesting things that we found when we were doing research for the book Whole, What Teachers Need to Help Students Thrive, is that the change in American schools isn't that we're more racially diverse or we're more socioeconomically diverse. It is that we are more diverse in our classroom when we look at the elements that students are bringing in that are called adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. ACEs are often unseen, unknown barriers to learning that have nothing to do with what happened today or even what's happened in class, but what has happened in the past that stands in the way of my connection in the classroom. And by the way, this is not only an impact for the kids, it increases the amount of stress in the classroom as we, as storytellers, as teachers, are trying to figure out, why am I not connecting? What's the challenge here? How do I respond to this student and their need? Did you know that teaching is the fourth most stressed out occupation in the entire United States? And part of it is because of this increase in the adverse childhood experiences that our children are bringing into the classroom. And remember, just one negative interaction between an adult that's struggling, my teacher that's struggling, and a student can break that fragile bond. If you look at the averages across the US in an average class of 28 kids, 6 of those students would have 2 or more ACEs that they bring into the classroom, these unseen, unknown barriers. 3 students of my 28 would have profound impacts from something in their past. And on average, half of my kids would be bringing in some kind of baggage, some kind of barrier to learning. Now, if you have struggling learners, if you're in an intervention classroom, you can double that. As a matter of fact, almost every single struggling student in American schools is impacted by an adverse childhood experience, if only because the struggle itself, over and over, repeated failure, is in and of itself an adverse childhood experience. This stress piles on. What we know about stress, and this is research from the University of Central Florida, is that for teachers and students in a high stress environment, we only process about half the information we would normally process. Think about the impact on your scope and sequence. We're talking about hybrid learning here, right? We're talking about a stressed out environment. My procedures are out the window. My norms are out the window. Stress is crazy. I'm not going to process as much information as I would normally process, whether I'm the teacher or the kid. And by the way, the information I do process will be understood at a level significantly below my average normal level of processing information. Crisis learning is distress learning. Crisis teaching is distress teaching. And that means that I have more things coming at me. I have more stress, and I am much more likely to simply become weak at self-regulation. I'm going to run out of steam. By the way, that's not a bad thing. That's not a critique. It's literally how our brains are made. So when we think about norms, when we think about standards, when we think about the critical elements to succeed in hybrid learning environments, we have to begin with self-care, with ourselves as the teacher. The thing is, you can't help others until you help yourself. It's one of the critical things that we found when we were doing research for the book, that if you want teachers to create classrooms that are engaging, you want to create an engaging movie in your classroom, you have to be able to engage yourself. You can't be out of strength for self-regulating. The first standards must be standards of self-care for our teachers. So I want to take us through a few ideas around how we ensure we are caring for ourselves. And the first thing is understanding that we can't ask nebulous general questions like, what kinds of stress are our teachers going to experience? This is personal. What kind of stress is me, myself, and am I going to experience in the classroom or outside of the classroom? So ways that I can respond to stress, ways that I can lift those weights of self-regulation and become stronger, more able to deal with the stress and be more effective in a hybrid learning environment. First of all, be aware of what's actually happening. You see, what happens to the human brain when we encounter stress is this little part of our brain in the very ancient part of our system, our brain. It's called the amygdala. It's part of the reptilian brain. It's super ancient. And it literally is responsible for the fight, flight, or freeze response. And it takes over. It literally hijacks our thinking parts of the brain, the advanced parts of the brain. And if we know that, if we can be aware of the signs, we can actually respond to it. Okay, I'm stressed out. Here's some things I need to do. So beware and understand it's not you, it's your brain. You're made this way. So one of the first ways to responding to the amygdala hijack is, first of all, have good relationships and nurture them. Lou Cozzolino, who's a professor of psychology at Pepperdine, found that the human brain actually shrinks without relationships, without connections. And remember, if you're not going into the school building, all of those good professional relationships, all of those good professional supports, those folks are not around you. You need to make sure you have those supports. You need to make sure that you understand who your lifeline is when you've had it, right? In the middle of the day, who you're going to reach out to and say, hey, I just need to chat for a moment. And that will help us to get over the hump. Number two, think about the story you're telling yourself. Is the story you're telling yourself, oh my gosh, I'm at home. I've never had to do this before. I'm crazy stressed. Or is the narrative different? Listen, I'm going to learn new things. We're going to do this together with my students. We're going to make our way through. And you know what? We're going to be fine at the end. One of the things we know in counseling is it's less important what's actually happening to you. The most important thing is the narrative you're telling yourself and you're telling your kids. Part of that is perspective. If you know this book, Zoom by Banyai, you begin with one picture and you kind of zoom out and you figure out, oh, it's a rooster, but actually it's a rooster outside of a window and there are kids looking at the rooster. And at the end of the day, it's a play set. It's all about perspective. And can we step back and look at the entire picture? Listen, the entire picture of the hybrid learning environment today is that, number one, it's temporary, right? Number two, there are a lot of different factors. Number three, that we're doing our best. And number four is that if we create really good connections with our students and we focus on the basics like reading and mathematics, we're going to be fine, right? We can be a little bit behind, whatever that means, whatever artificial goal line we have, we're going to be okay. But that means I have to be okay inside, and I have to make sure that my kids are okay on the inside. One of the ways that I make sure that I stay strong is to engage in self-supervision, right? To understand when I'm having a moment. At Stegan Leadership Academy, there are 3 questions that they pose that we should be asking ourselves. First of all, what's really happening, right? How am I really doing? What's most important right now and most needed? And what's the most helpful action I can take? And by the way, that may mean that we're not really having class today. We're going to have a therapy session today, all right? We're going to talk about what's going on today because something happened. We're going to attend to the needs in front of us, not what's written on a scope and sequence or in a textbook. For us ourselves, one of the ways that we stay strong in our ability to self-regulate, our ability to deal with the stress, our ability to operate effectively when all the norms have gone out the window and I'm working in different ways, is to do the things that do make us strong otherwise. That could be running, that could be yoga, that could be meditation, that could be going out to dinner or having a cocktail with your family. This is not about adding things to your to-do list. It is literally about taking care of yourself. And once you start living this way, where you're prioritizing taking care of yourself, you wonder how you ever lived without it. I will tell you, for myself, being very, very authentic, I started working out with a trainer and I started scuba diving. And I can't imagine my life before working out with my trainer during the week and scuba diving on the weekend. It literally has kept me sane. Now, you don't have to go scuba diving, but I'm asking you, what keeps you sane? What is it? That, you know, my friend T in New York, Taliba, she introduced us to Pilates. We're all doing Pilates on the weekend during the beginning of COVID with a trainer out of New York City. It was grounding. Do what helps you to stay strong. Practice makes perfect. And love yourself. Practice self-compassion. Self-compassion is the ability to notice our own suffering, to feel moved by it, and to extend to ourselves the warmth and care that we would toward a friend. I guarantee you that some of the folks who are right now listening to my voice are high self-actualizers. They are high performers. You are a high performer. And you're like, oh, I really screwed up that lesson, or why aren't things going well? It's okay. Um, Kristen Neff, she's a self-compassion expert and author. She says that it's about finding well-being in the experience of being fully human. And this is a human moment. By the way, it really is a human moment. Just like I talked about the amygdala, which is literally a part of your reptilian brain, honor your biology. We get stressed. It is a physical reaction. Your kids get stressed. It's a physical reaction. One of the most researched ways for dealing with the physicality of stress is actually breathing, counting your breaths, counting your pulse, just calming. And then reflecting, literally nurturing the quiet within each of us. I give you in the PowerPoint a variety of resources you might look at for yourself and also for your kids. Because you see, if we're self-aware of the things going on around us, then that self-awareness, that is actually like the bumpers in the bowling alley, okay? The self-awareness can help us kind of stay in our lane and navigate the new procedures and routines. And you know what? If someone is observing you, which is a crazy idea, but let's just say someone is observing your classroom on Zoom and they give you a frowny face, you can step back and have some perspective and be like, you know what? You're really missing the boat. And I'll take your frowny face and I'll think about what I could do better. But you know what? Right now I'm doing my best and it's okay. And I'm going to do right by my kids. Lastly, you know, that loss, that change of habits, that change in procedures and routines, the change in the expectations and the guideposts so we knew we were doing well, we're all grieving those, every single one of us, and it's okay. And I just want to say that sometimes one of the best ways to be stronger is to sit down and just let it all out. Arthur Tara Moore talks about, she says, let the tears come. We've been so misled about tears. Tears are our body's natural system for expressing and moving through emotions, especially grief. They're such a gift. They're one of the most exquisite parts of our design, and they have healing magic. So in those days where you have just absolutely had it, at the end of the day, take a moment and let it go, because you're actually recovering. You are building that resiliency muscle. And by the way, this isn't some mental health psychologist mumbo jumbo. Every single thing I just talked about is rooted in the biggest corpus of research around teaching and learning. And that is the research of John Hattie and visible learning. Teacher self-confidence, one of the single most critical, important factors for effective teaching and learning. And we build self-confidence by building our strength, by honoring ourselves, by being compassionate, by giving ourselves some leeway and saying, you know, Kev, you're doing okay. It was an okay day. We got through it. Tomorrow will be even better. That's us. Standards of practice in hybrid learning systems have to begin with standards of self-care, hands down. If we are not strong as educators, if we're not taking care of ourselves, nothing else matters, because teaching and learning begins with teaching. It begins with us. There are things that we need to think about related to the student. So I want to now look at 3 different student stories as we consider how we differentiate what happens with our kids for social emotional success, creating a caring classroom climate in a hybrid environment. And I want to talk about 3 different kinds of students: students with emotional needs, students with skill gaps, and students with physical needs. So let's start with the student with emotional needs. I call this student the wounded learner. Our children are at the greatest risk for depression amongst every other human being, all other age groups. Severe depression, moderately severe depression. By the way, the kids who are depressed are in our classes. The kids who have behavioral needs, they are in front of us every single day. The top emotional challenges: sleep deprivation. By the way, stress leads to sleep deprivation. What's happening with my siblings? What's happening with my parents? Are my parents employed right now? Is money tight? All of that goes to sleep deprivation. Substance abuse, legal, illegal, and prescription. Adderall, which is prescribed for ADHD, is one of the most abused substances amongst all students. Self-harm. You may have seen students cutting themselves. By the way, I can become addicted to the endorphins that are released when I am harming myself. It's a different kind of drug. Eating disorders, anorexia, bulimia, emotional eating, anxiety disorders. I might see them, I might not. And then depression and suicide risk. I'm sure that you could list other emotional challenges in front of us. These are all part of the brick wall that stand in our way as we're trying to make that Hitmaker movie in our classroom. These are all barriers to learning in that hybrid environment because stress is high. I have a greater incidence of depression. I have a greater incidence of emotional and behavioral needs amongst our students. But the real challenge here, the real enemy is the unseen and unheard silent suffering. Because if I can see it, if I know about it, I can address it. But if I can't, I don't know what to do. It's out there and it's impacting what's happening in my classroom and I can't see it. I can't pinpoint it. What do we do to solve that? Continuous safe check-in. This is a solution to ask them, ask every child to come alongside them, whether they're in my classroom, whether they're on my Zoom or in my Google Hangout, whatever it is, to continuously figure out how are they doing. And I'm going to show you a way to do that. I'm going to use an example of a piece of software. You don't have to use that software. Although I want to note that through a special relationship, I can get you that software for almost nothing. But either way, I want you to think about how do you continuously check in with your kids, no matter where they're at. Questions that you might ask. How does your body feel today? Are you sick? Are you injured? Is someone in your life sick or injured and you're feeling sick too? Are you hungry? Are you feeling great? By the way, you have to create a culture of caring so that the student actually feels comfortable saying, I'm hungry. They might feel that there's a stigma attached to that or a stigma attached to feeling sick. How's your social life going today? Is your brain space being taken up by a disagreement or conflict? We've all been there, right? When someone important to us, we're fighting with them. Maybe you're feeling bad, you're feeling low energy with your social life. Social connection indicators might have the greatest impact on our adolescents. And in a digital environment, we have things like cyberbullying, which might be going on, or conflict with parents. Abusive behaviors could be reflected here. Or simply, how is your energy today? Are you exhausted or tired? Maybe because you weren't sleeping well. Maybe because people are fighting in your house. That stress, it beat you down. Or are you, sipping monster drinks out of the refrigerator? Maybe no one's home supervising what you're doing. Maybe you're having, sugar frosted sugar bombs for cereal. Energy is something that sometimes I can see, but it's also something that is kind of a result of some of the other things going on in my life. But energy is a critical element for self-regulation. And all of these emoji-based screens, emojis are the clinical universal language. So whether you are in first grade or you are in 12th grade, you understand these. And by the way, it takes about a minute to get through this kind of check-in. I want you to imagine a social or emotional x-ray that allows us to look into every single student, no matter whether they are in front of us physically or they're on our Zoom, and lets us see where they are social and emotionally using that minute emoji check-in. That is a piece of software. It's called Rhythm. Again, you can use this on your own. You don't have to have the software, but Rhythm allows us to see into the kids and then to get real-time information, to know, do I need to have my kids collaborating today because they're high energy and they're ready to go? Do I have a student that I need to do a one-to-one check-in because there's something going on? Do I need to have my kids start the class with jumping jacks because they are really low energy? Or which of my students need to be working independently because of their brain space today? I can know that. I can see that. And all of a sudden, instead of having a brick wall that's masked, that unseen, unheard barrier, I can reveal those barriers and I can get ahead of things that could frankly lead to things that are really traumatic, all right, that are really tragic. As a matter of fact, this particular system gives real-time alerts. Your students can put in notes. And this is a real example. The student put in, they wrote, I feel like my brain is going to pop open. The artificial intelligence is so sensitive, it identified that that was a risk alert, and it sent the alert out to the teacher over and over and over until the teacher actually went in and said, okay, saw the alert, I'm checking in with the student. We have to get ahead of these things. Otherwise, the stress ratchets it up, right? I'm going to lose more strength in my ability to self-regulate as a student and also as a teacher. There are other things we can do to support that student well-being to make sure that we can see the unseen. Video on, please. If we're not using the video, we are missing 90% plus of the communication. And frankly, we're losing the most important kinds of communication. Like, are you smiling or are you sad? What's your energy level? Using private chat. Remember, you could chat individually with a student. How are you doing? How are you checking in? Giving them a little note. Awesome job. Use the phone. If the student has a phone, call them directly to check in. Certainly check in with parents or clergy or social worker. And by the way, if your kids are in class with you, think about how are you using the time after class, before and after school to check in to make sure everything is okay as you are seeing these concerns. A hand on the shoulder is not going to give you COVID, and it could be critical for that student getting through the day. That could literally be the thing that rejuvenates their ability to self-regulate in class, or a note or a comment, especially like a happy note. We already talked about emoji-based assessments, but I want you to think about how do you create your own plan, your own schedule for checking in constantly and continuously so the unseen becomes seen. This is an example of that. When you get the webinar materials and the slides, I'll make sure you get this. So real basic idea. Start off with that kind of check-in. Then I'm going to have some individual work time where I'm letting my students catch up, and I am looking at my information. And I'm going to reach out to the kids right away at the beginning of class that need a little bit of help, that need a connection, that might have something going on. Then I'm going to do some direct instruction. Video on, please. Then ask my students to work with peers. Let's do that for a couple of cycles. Then I'm going to check in again. How's it going? How's the day going? Everybody's still with me? How's our energy level? I'm going to do that after lunch, right? And I'm going to do that at the end of the day. What gets scheduled gets done. Schedule your relationship check-ins because relationships are the oxygen for learning. Second type of student, the student with the skills gap, skills needs. I call this student the anxious learner. Why? Because the critical element for teaching and learning is actually student self-confidence. It isn't exactly what the student knows. It isn't their prior skills. It is their self-confidence that they can learn. Now, this is a little bit of a complex chart. So I want to make sure you understand what I'm trying to show you here. Because the big idea is that impulse control and self-regulation correlate with mindset and confidence. So if you look for that pattern that has the really long red bar and then the shorter pink bar, these are the kids that have less self-regulation. They're more impulsive. When they're doing long calculations, they find checking their work tiresome. They have to force themselves to do it. When they're solving math problems, they often just see the solution. They can be absolutely brilliant at math, but they struggle to tell you how they figured it out. When they learn, it can be in fits and starts. They can be confused and then suddenly it clicks. Are you like that? In a study group, if they're working through difficult material, they're more likely to sit back and listen. Self-regulation as a skill set, social emotional literacy, leads to things like a growth mindset, self-confidence that I can learn. It leads to greater science self-efficacy, so that's better science outcomes, and greater interest in math. And these skills can be taught. This is a graph from a really interesting study. It was called the Perry Preschool Program. They took 3- and 4-year-olds with lower than average intelligence, and they split them into 2 groups. One group went to the Perry Preschool where they were taught very specific skills for self-regulation, building up those muscles, right? Social emotional literacy. The second group didn't have that curriculum. They had more of a regular preschool, and they followed those kids for 40 years. Now, these were kids with lower than average IQs. The students that went to the Perry Preschool that learned those social emotional skill sets, they had greater strength at self-regulation. They were more likely to graduate from high school to earn a good living. They were less likely to use drugs or end up being in jail or being arrested. These are skills that not only can be learned, but they are critical for all of the future success that happens. So when we think about skill gaps, it isn't necessarily my gap in algebra, my gap in dealing with fractions. It is my self-confidence. What is my expectation of my students in terms of their ability to master a subject? Am I expecting them to keep up, right? Get through it? Is my expectation about speed? Or am I letting my kids sit in it and master what they have to master? By the way, do I have self-confidence that my students are going to get it? Research shows that a lot of teachers actually give up on themselves. They don't give up on their kids. They give up on their kids themselves. They just keep bouncing their head against that brick wall or that unseen barrier. How self-confident is that student? And are we bolstering their self-confidence? What's their impulse control? How quickly do they need to go? Not how quickly did the people who created the textbook want them to go. But how, and remember back to that research that with stress, I'm only going to go about half speed, and everything that I am taking in, I'm going to take in at a lower level of difficulty. And then I have actual physical cognitive disabilities like dyslexia or math dyscalculia, right? That I'm going to have to deal with. The thing is that the skill gap, the need that I'm actually bouncing into that's preventing me from making my hit maker movie, engaging in the classroom, it's not what it says on the darn assessment. The real unseen need is the student's own expectation of their failure. What is coming over the horizon for them today, next week? Is it going to be another experience where they feel like a failure, where they feel like a fool, where they didn't do well, where someone said, you failed, or you got a D, or you got a C? How do we attack the student's own internal expectation of failure? Let them actually master content. Mastery education is actually the law in the state of Idaho. A lot of the online learning programs that are highly successful. So this is a great time to learn from those, right? As we're doing online learning, they actually allow the student to go at their own pace to master it. I'll tell you, my own students, my own kids, I have two of them still in secondary school, one middle schooler, one high schooler. They're part of an online academy, and they don't have due dates. All the due dates are literally, it has to be done by the end of the semester, but they can go at their own pace to master the content. One of the ways we make sure that happens is we slow down, because we are moving too fast. My friend Ray McNulty, many of you probably know him over at the Successful Practices Network. He works with Dr. Bill Daggett. He says most curriculum is unrelated to our primary learning outcomes. We rush to learn, and we actually learn less as a result. For kids who learn more slowly, a school's focused on whole child philosophy, on giving them the time to actually master it. Let them sit in it. They can do it. Listen, any student can read. They can learn to read, but it might take them a little bit longer, especially with stress. So creating a scenario where failure is not possible. In Mr. Baird's class, no one in this class is going to fail. It's absolutely an impossibility, because tomorrow's another day. So no matter how it went today, tomorrow's going to be amazing. Some things that we might do. Create a capstone project where your students are working toward one large outcome, and that allows them to kind of synthesize over time. So they'll catch up eventually if they had that lower self-regulation, all right? Let your students choose the topic for their capstone, or choose a topic that they're working on collaboratively. Choice in and of itself is an accelerator. If you don't have quiz recovery, you're going to need credit recovery. What do I mean by that? If a student bombed a quiz, let them work through it. Assessment in and of itself has no pedagogical value. None. Testing doesn't teach. But having students go through the test, see what they got wrong, talk about it, and correct it, it does teach. Allowing students a mixture of collaborative and independent effort, and then giving them milestones on the journey. I can still give them ideas of how they're doing, right? Things they need to look back and learn again or sit in a little bit more deeply. And by the way, when it comes to either those milestones or the final project, have students review each other, have them grade each other, turn the review, the evaluation into a learning opportunity. You still have the final say, but instead of just giving a grade, let them really think about it. They will themselves understand why they got the grade that they got. My colleague, Dr. Imardino Yang at the University of Southern California, Rossier School of Education, was quoted in the press, New York Times. It is literally neurobiologically impossible to think deeply about things you don't care about. So think about this idea of strength and self-regulation. And I don't have any bumpers anymore in my bowling alley. All of my procedures and routines are out the window. Everything is new. And now I have to care about the Phoenicians. I just don't. Choice is an accelerator. And if I don't care, it's even harder to learn. I can master any standard thinking about things in my own life or in my own interest set. I guarantee it. The hard part is finding that connection for the student. You might ask them, how is it connected? This is an example of one way we can build in success. So full disclosure, 20 some years ago, I helped create this technology called Achieve 3000. And today it is one of the world's most utilized interventions. But it's not because it's an intervention that's interesting. The foundational design of Achieve 3000 is that every single student would always have a successful reading experience. It was impossible for them to fail, because what the technology does is it makes sure that the students are presented with reading content at their reading level. All right. The precision differentiates it. We can do that in lots of ways, making sure that students are always successful. Show me a student who feels like their classroom session was an abject failure, like they were an idiot, and I will show you a student that doesn't want to come to class tomorrow. Making sure that they can succeed. By the way, when you do that, you really do work miracles. At Achieve, whether they're struggling readers or they are advanced readers, they move kids 2 times, 3 times, 4 times ahead in 9 months compared to expectations for reading skill growth. Again, it's not because of the content or technology. It's because the students succeed. They build their self-confidence. Back to that work of John Hattie. Self-care, teacher self-confidence. Mastery, student self-confidence. My third student is a student with physical needs. And I think of this student as the uncomfortable learner. Uncomfortable, why? Well, the student could have ADHD. If I am a student with ADHD, I am uncomfortable just sitting. I need to move around. I need different kinds of stimulus. I might sit in the chair and then I might go into soft seating. I might sit in the kitchen and then go to the living room. Don't put me in one bucket or one basket. And by the way, if you look at the percentage of students that have these kinds of difficulties that are served, for instance, by IDEA, it's significant, more than 1 in 10. Asthma and allergies. If I can't breathe, it is really hard to concentrate. Again, going back to my favorite example, the Phoenicians. If I can't breathe, I don't care about the Phoenicians. I'm sorry, I'm over it. Thinking about what's happening in my air. That could be at home, that could be in the classroom, right? Same with allergies. What's going on physically? Light sensitivity. By the way, you can be light sensitive and not have autism, but light sensitivity and autism go together. And by the way, autism rates are up about 10%. That's according to the CDC report, March 26, 2020. But all of us can have light sensitivity. By the way, best example of that, ever sit in a dark room after lunch and fall asleep? Make it a dark, warm room, and I am toast. That's temperature sensitivity. Top physical needs. I could be high energy. I could be low energy. All right. I might need to be something that wiggles around. I might need to stand to learn. All right. I might need to be in soft seating, higher light, lower light, a harder seat, a softer seat. Ever go to a sporting event in those hard bleachers and figure out that you just can't pay attention because it's hurting your bottom? That happens to a lot of our kids every single day as they are on that hard seat in the classroom or at home. I might need to be independent today. I just can't deal. I need to focus, or I might need to be collaborative. I've got a lot of energy. I'm ready to go. Ergonomics. By the way, ergonomics are all about not only making sure that I feel okay, I'm not uncomfortable, all right, my back isn't hurting me, but I'm literally getting enough brain into, or enough blood into my brain. And that's true. If I cut off the circulation in my legs, I don't have as much circulation. I don't have as much oxygen. I literally do not think as well. So the barrier here, I know it could seem like, well, I only have hard chairs, or I have an inflexible classroom, or I have a certain kind of desk. That's not the hard part. The unseen barrier is our own inflexible thinking, our own ability to rethink how I actually differentiate the environment. And my best example here is from our own professional development. I love this meme. If I die, I hope it's during an in-service, because the transition to death would be so subtle. You've been there. I hope you're not there today during this, but we've all been there. It is inflexible thinking on what the environment might be, what it could be. Here's an example of what it might be. This is a real life classroom. This is from a learning academy outside of Dallas, Texas. It is filled with students who are all boys. They're primarily African-American or Black American boys and Latino boys. And they have all been in trouble. They've all had some kind of challenge. And in this particular environment, they begin working one-to-one. All of the curriculum one-to-one, and they are presenting to each other. Whatever they learn today, they talk about it with each other, they present to each other. Then they move into a small group presentation, small groups of 2, groups of 3, groups of 4. By the way, if I'm having a bad day, there's an area where I can go and I can work that's quiet. There aren't distractions. I can work alone. But every single piece of the curriculum, I work up to the big presentation where I stand in front of my peers and I talk about the subject. The goal here, you get it. They're building self-confidence. They're also producing language. They are integrating accountable talk, close reading, close listening, but mostly it is about social and emotional safety as I build up to confidence building, risking everything up there on the stage. How does your team continuously consider the environment? Have you thought about that? Have you asked your students, are they comfortable sitting where they're sitting in their home, or do you just assume that's the only place they can be? Are you giving your students saying, hey, listen, maybe you want to move to environment B or environment C? Have you said to a teacher where or to the parent where the student's kind of zoning out, hey, they might need a couple of different places. Do you have a reading nook where they could go into? It's true that no flexibility, where I always have to be in rows. Thou shalt sit in a row facing me forever and ever. We call those tombstone classrooms. There's no flexibility, but there are other things to take into effect. Lighting. You see on Zoom, you see a student in the dark, you might say, hey, Kevin, you want to turn on the lights? Can you turn on the lights? The actual furnishings, the heating, is it hot? Is it cold? The floor itself, is the floor hard? Can I sit on the floor? Is that okay? By the way, I really suggest that for your kids. You know what? It's okay to ask your kids at home to have story time on the floor and to move their computer. That's just fine. If you want to, if they're younger or whatever, or just say, hey, let's all move into the living room if that's okay with your parents or the space. I want you to think about other things you might not have considered. Do you see this classroom? Do you notice how I have the chairs that look like wood chairs, and they're really, really low to the ground, and they have other chairs that are higher to the ground? Have you ever sat in a chair that was too small for you, or sat in a chair that was too big for you and felt really uncomfortable? Having height adjustable spaces is an absolute critical way to make sure that our children are not uncomfortable. This is another example. I love classrooms that actually look like a workplace, because that means that I am preparing my students for the 4th Industrial Revolution, which is where we are right now. This workspace has lots of different kinds of places. You can see in the background, I could sit in a traditional chair. I could sit on a wobbly stool. I could work collaboratively. I could work independently. And I have all those good whiteboards that I can collaborate. I have choice, because you see, I don't want to tell the teacher I'm uncomfortable. By the way, the teacher might say, yeah, right. But I want to have the choice for, maybe I need to stand. Maybe I need to sit. Maybe I need a wobbly stool. Let your kids choose to find comfort so that they can concentrate. That is a form of helping that student learn self-regulation. For all of us, in order to keep the idea of spaces in front of us, we actually promote quarterly classroom expos, where you bring your teachers together and you think about, how's this space going? What could it be? I'm not talking about changing up the furniture. I'm not talking about getting space age shaped desks. I'm talking about thinking about the actual space. Could be at home, could be, by the way, where the teacher is sitting, all right? Where they are literally physically sitting. Are they comfortable? If you could see my chair I'm in, I had to change my chair because I've been sitting so much. I cracked the handles, the rests, and it was hurting my arms. So I had to go get a new chair. Those kinds of things. We host these quarterly design expos, and you can actually sign up. Kevin at collegecareer.org. Bring your kids in. Ask your kids to suggest what would make an even more comfortable learning environment. Standards for hybrid teaching and learning. Yeah, they're not any different from the standards for regular teaching and learning. The big difference right now, folks, it's internal. It is that the regular procedures and routines and habits and mileposts, they've changed. And that's affected us on the inside. That's affecting our own ability as teachers and our kids to self-regulate. When it comes to self-regulation, self-care has to be the first standard. Unseen barriers are the biggest hurdle. Constant, continuous check-ins, like that emoji-based check-in with rhythm, are absolutely critical to make the unseen visible. One of those unseen barriers is the fear of failure. It is the greatest disability, fear of failure. What my consideration, what I believe is coming over the horizon tomorrow or the next lesson or the next chapter is failure for me. We have to slow down and allow kids to sit into mastery, especially now, because the research says if they're stressed, they're only going to take in about half. And by the way, for us, we're stressed, we can only take in about half as well. And lastly, inflexible thinking is the unseen barrier that leads to inflexible learning. Differentiate the environment. Think about the student on your Zoom or your digital classroom that seems to be out of it and ask, hey, you want to sit on the floor today, right? Why don't you study from the kitchen today? How about the couch? It is fine with me if you are sitting on your bed, as long as that's okay with your parents. Let them change it up, and maybe for you as well. Standing is one of the easiest ways to do it, or just simply getting that motion going. Movement, ergonomics, a choice of space and place, and thinking about light and temperature and seating surface and sound. Is it loud? Can I move freely? Can I choose to collaborate, or would I prefer just to work alone today? Am I supposed to be creative, or am I focused? Remember, our students are going to go into an economy that's like the gig economy, where they're dealing with things like quantum physics, where robots have taken all of the jobs at the fast food places, so they're going to have to find something else to do. That's true, by the way. White Castle, they have robots right now making your hamburgers. We call this the fourth industrial revolution. And we need to be thinking about our spaces to make sure that they mirror the kinds of activities our students have to learn. And at the heart of that is actually the skill of self-regulation, matching space to the human in the task. If we engage the heart, if we engage the soul, the mind will follow. Because you see, it's the heart and soul that lets the amygdala calm down, settle your glitter, so the mind can actually engage. That's what meteor education does, by the way. Meteor education comes alongside and helps us think about how we create environments that engage the soul, that engage the heart, that are comfortable, that allow us to self-regulate, that look like the fourth industrial revolution. And by the way, that have air quality so that my kids with asthma aren't going to struggle to breathe, or the air quality that's actually killing things like a pesky virus. In my career, I have been blessed to become acquainted with a man in the lower left, and that's Captain Jim Lovell. And I have enormous respect for him. He was actually the captain of the Apollo 13 mission. And if you watch the movie Apollo 13, there's this famous quote that says, failure is not an option. But what Captain Lovell would say is that minds matter the most. The team solving the problem matters the most, especially when I'm in a hybrid environment when I am having a problem and I am remote, I am somewhere between the earth and the moon, and Houston, we've got a problem and you're a long way away. It takes a team that has expertise. I believe this is our Apollo 13 moment. And my local, more nearby gym level is a woman named Kim Bolser at Meter Education. And she can actually help you get into a demo, for instance, for rhythm, go into a deeper dive into these kind of environmental conversations, or even talk to folks who are finding success in hybrid environments. Email her. She'll do that for free because that's her job. It's only 1 minute to check in for a child. And by the way, it only takes a minute to check in with yourself, to calm your breathing, to take your pulse, to say, Kevin, how's it really going today? That 1 minute is the difference, or it could be the difference between boredom to finding a passion with support and finding excitement and believing I can do it. And that 1 minute could be the difference from moving from unseen trauma that a child is suffering through alone to bridging the student through that moment to a place where they're ready to go. They're strong again and they can attack the day. Setting the standard to differentiate our connection. That is the standard for hybrid learning. I hope you'll reach out to Kim to dig a little bit deeper. You can go to habitatforheroes.org. You can find information about these topics. I hope you're coming away today with at least one idea for yourself and one idea for your kids in these very interesting times where we are literally creating our own bumpers as we go bowling together. Thank you so much for being here. Take care.